To order. Southern New Hampshire, this is a meeting of the Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission Technical Advisory Committee. It's January 19th, 9:30 a.m. And I'd like to do a roll call, please.
I wonder if we can go around the room. And everyone introduce themselves.
Okay. Why don't we start over there?
Great, Cole Real with the Greater Manchester Chamber.
Linda Kumar, Francistown.
Andrew Paddock, Chester.
Nancy Michaels, Derry London, Derry Chamber of Commerce.
I enjoyed service under Planning Department.
And MTA Cart.
Suzanne Nienaber, SNHPC.
Sylvia Von Allock, Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission.
Carl Eppich, also with the commission.
Zach Swick, also with the commission.
Fred Burberish with Easter Seals.
Julian Harris, Boston.
Mark Sunan, Town of New Boston.
Adam Lesney with the Planning Commission.
Nate Miller, staff of the commission.
Caleb Dobbins, Manchester DPW.
And Jason Cleckhorn, Manchester Planning.
And I'm Bruce Thomas from Town of Hooksett. First item on the agenda is the review of the notes, meeting minutes from the last meeting. And the November 17th meeting.
We do have a few people online. I wonder if they might quick introduce themselves. Bruce. So Tammy,
Tammy Zamoyski, Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission.
Pam,
Cam Perlman, staff with the commission.
Lee,
Lee Levine, Federal Highway Administration.
and we have someone from the town of Londonderry.
Hi, Kelly Karen, Town of Londonderry.
Hi, Kelly. Thank you. Okay, that'll wrap that up.
Move to accept the notes as presented.
Second.
Okay, thank you. I have a motion to approve the draft notes of the November 17th meeting.
A motion or a vote?
One motion is, he didn't hear us.
Oh,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead. We have a motion and we have a second.
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is the overview of the fiscal year 2023 to 2026 PIP program.
Right.
By Nate Miller.
Thank you, Bruce. Oh, I don't know why it does this. All right, see if I can. Can those of you online see this presentation in full screen mode?
Yes, we can.
Excellent, thank you. So we've got a lot to cover over the course of this TAC meeting today. So I will jump right in and give you all an overview of the freshly released fiscal year 2023 to 2026 TIP. Many of you have seen this slide before. For those of you who haven't, this is in a general sense how our metropolitan planning process goes. We have a long-range plan that feeds into a state 10-year plan process, which covers 10 years and is a funding commitment when something goes into the 10-year plan. And then we have a federal requirement to for a 4-year program of projects that we call the TIP, or the Transportation Improvement Program. Any project utilizing federal dollars needs to be included in an approved TIP. And essentially, a lot of this work that goes into developing the TIP actually happens through the 10-year plan process. In effect, the first 4 years of the 10-year plan largely constitute the TIP. So we are in the cycle now of updating our TIP for the fiscal year 23 to 26 period. That is a process that happens in conjunction with our colleagues, obviously, at New Hampshire DOT, as well as the other MPOs and regional planning commissions around the state. We released our draft TIP. Actually, we posted it yesterday afternoon, but the comment period technically starts today. Today is the formal day of release. If you look in today's Union Leader, there's a legal advertisement from us announcing the release of the TIP. It is posted on the front page of the SNHPC website. It should be very easy for people to access. The public comment period we're holding is a 30-day public comment period. It opens today and it will run through February 20th of 2023. So this isn't going to be your only opportunity to react and respond to the TIP. You feel free to read it. digest it, and you'll have another opportunity to provide feedback on the tip at your February 16th meeting. Ultimately, we are leading towards a public hearing to consider adoption of the tip after that 30-day comment period has come to a conclusion, and that is scheduled for our MPM meeting on February 21st. And my slide doesn't want to advance. Okay, so I'm gonna jump in, and I'm gonna move fairly quickly because there's a lot of different projects in the tip that I want to highlight and make sure you're all aware of. I'm going to start with 5 bridge projects. These are local bridge projects. They normally wouldn't appear in the tip because normally there wouldn't be federal funding associated with these projects. A lot of these projects historically were state aid bridge program funded. With the new Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, there is a bridge formula program that New Hampshire is benefiting from, and as part of the last 10-year plan process, New Hampshire DOT proposed and Governor and Council concurred to utilize a portion of that bridge program funding to support and enhance and accelerate a number of local bridge projects around the state. So these 5 bridge projects now have federal construction funding associated with them from that IIJA program, and as a result, they are included in the tip. So we have Griffin Mill Road in Auburn, Beals Road in Bedford, Old County Road North in Francistown, and then 2 bridges in New Boston, local bridges, Greg Mill Road and Tucker Mill Road. So when you look in the draft tip, you'll see that these projects are there because there is federal mobile funding in the construction phase. Bedford project 40664. This is the widening of Route 3 from Hawthorne Drive to Manchester Airport Access Road. This is a project that we've been talking about through a number of 10-year plan processes. The total funding in this tip, and when we talk about funding in the tip, we are talking about funding that is programmed between the years 2023 and 2026. In this case, and in a lot of cases, there is construction phase work that's going to occur beyond the horizon of the TIF. So in this case, the construction of this project is scheduled to start in fiscal year 2026, but it's going to continue in 2027 beyond the TIP horizon. So those funds aren't included in the TIP because we're just focused for the purposes of the TIP on fiscal year 23 to 26. This project is now fully funded in the 10-year plan, and we don't anticipate any issues with the funding that's occurring beyond the TIP horizon. Bedford Merrimack 16100. This is a turnpike project. It's improvements to the Bedford Mainline Toll Plaza. And it is now confirmed that the preferred alternative going to construction is all electronic tolling at the Bedford Mainline Toll Plaza. If you remember the last tip, this was the scope of work was to institute either open road tolling or all electronic tolling. Open road tolling being similar to what you see on I-93 at the Hooksett tolls. Open road tolling is not going to be the preferred alternative. The scope has been clarified. It will be all electronic tolling at the Bedford Mainline Toll Plaza, and that will go to construction over the next 2 years.
Nathan, question on that one. So you had said originally that these were required if there was federal funds, and there's federal funds in the turnpike?
There are not federal funds in this particular project. DOT's practice historically has been to include turnpike projects in the TIP in case there are ancillary federal dollars needed at some point to help advance those those turnpike projects. But you are correct. If you actually look at this project and some of the other turnpike projects that we'll talk about, there is not currently any federal dollars associated with this turnpike project. Bow 29641. You may say, why are we including a project in Bow in our TIP? Bow is not one of the Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission member communities. And so just as a reminder to everybody, we are responsible for ensuring that all projects in the Manchester urbanized area are included in our TIP. We have a memorandum of understanding with our colleagues at the Central New Hampshire Planning Commission that ensures that we include any projects outside of the SNHPC region in the Manchester urbanized area in our TIP. So if you looked at a map, or at least the urban areas are about to change resulting from the 2020 census, but if you look at a current map of the urban areas, you'll see that the Manchester urbanized area snakes slightly north into the towns of Bow, Allenstown, and Pembroke. This particular project on Route 3A actually does encompass part of the Manchester urbanized area, so we carry it in our TIP for that reason. I'm not going to speak a whole lot about the scope of work of this project, other than to say that it is moving forward. In the current TIP, it was programmed for construction in fiscal year 22. It's now scheduled for construction over the next 2 years. The DOT does have a project website specific to this project with some of the conceptual design. So if you're interested in learning more about this project, you can Google BO 29641 and look at those concept plans. Candia 41592. This is a project that we added into the 10-year plan 3 cycles ago. It is now making its way towards the beginning of the preliminary engineering phase work. And so that PE phase work is included in the draft TIP. So there's $500,000, a little over $500,000 in funding programmed in this TIP. The majority of the funding related to this project is construction funding that will occur starting in 2028, which is beyond our TIP horizon. So this project is proceeding as we would expect, and initial PE phase work is scheduled to begin later in fiscal 23. Londonderry exit 4A. We've had presentations from Wendy Johnson and the team at DOT leading exit 4A. I won't go into a lot of detail about the particularities of exit 4A, other than to say that exit 4A used to be all captured in a project called 13065. There are now a series of child projects that have been broken out because the project is going to be implemented in phases. You will see 4 of those child projects listed in our TIP, those being the A project, B project, C project, and E project. So the B project is the construction of the connecting roadway from the end of the A project, and the C project continues on from the end of the B project to the Route 102 intersection. So it's the A, B, and C project together are essentially the 3 phases. The E project is a separate project to encompass building demolitions on Folsom Road that are needed to advance the other projects. In terms of funding in the TIP, it's broken out. I won't read each of these numbers, but obviously each of the 3 phases of the project is a significant work effort. Part of project A is already occurring before the TIP period of 2023 to 2026 happens. So some of the costs in project A have already been incurred by the time this TIP period starts. 13065A is expected to continue through this fiscal year and next fiscal year. B will start at the end of project A and continue to 2026, and there will be some overlap between B and C, where C starts in 25 and continues through 26. This was a result of the change in the project from a design build approach to a design bid build approach with phased construction. And again, we've had the project manager and others from DOT give specific presentations about this particular project, but for the purpose of today, I'll leave it high level. Hooksett 29611. This is the reconstruction of Route 3A or Route 3, I should say, from Route 27 to Alice Avenue. I am actually, as is Bruce, on the project committee for this project. It is moving forward as anticipated. Total project funding in the TIP is 6.44 million. It will start in 2026 for construction and continue beyond the TIP horizon. We are honing in on the preferred alternative design for this project and beginning to make initial plans towards a public hearing for the layout commission finding for right-of-way acquisitions. Hooksett 43851. Bruce, this is a project near and dear to your heart. We were just talking about a few minutes ago. This is the reconstruction of 2 intersections as scoped. So Route 3A and Hackett Hill Road, as well as Route 3A and Main Street. Total funding in the TIP is programmed currently at $4 million with construction in 2026. This is the first listing for this project in the TIP. It was added at the end of the 10-year plan cycle as a result of some of the additional IIJA funding that was coming available at that time. So we're happy to see this project in the tip and moving forward. Londonderry 41593 is the improvements at the intersection of Route 28 and 128. You remember maybe from the last 10-year plan cycle, we added a substantial amount of supplemental funding to fully fund this project. It is fully funded. There is only a fraction of the funding programmed in this tip, about 1.35 million or so. Construction is beyond the tip horizon, so starting in fiscal 2027. So there's another, the construction funding for this project is fully funded in the 10-year plan, but isn't included here because it's starting after the tip. Londonderry 41715. This is improvements at the intersection of Route 28 and Stonehenge Road. Total funding in the tip is 4.7 million. This is a cost sharing effort between the town of Londonderry and New Hampshire DOT to advance this project. Construction is currently scheduled for fiscal 24. There was a delay from the last tip in the construction schedule. Additional time was needed for right-of-way acquisition due to some MS4 stormwater control measures that needed to be incorporated into the project. So my understanding is progress has been made on that front, and construction is scheduled now for 2024. Manchester 13587. This is bridge rehabilitation on Route 3, which is Elm Street over the B&M Railroad. Total funding in the tip is 5.73 million. Construction scheduled in 2025. It's a new project in the tip. It's not a new project in general, and part of that is it's appearing now because of federal funding that has been incorporated into the project. 16099 in Manchester is PE and right-of-way phase work related to the reconstruction of exit 6 and 7. There's $11.43 million programmed in the tip. This is also turnpike funding. It is construction schedule has been significantly delayed, and we talked about that as part of the last 10-year plan update. Delayed well beyond this tip period. In part, that is due to a number of funding constraints in the turnpike program as a result of some of the turnpike revenue declines that were seen during COVID. It may be that some of those revenues are bouncing back, and some in this project and others may be able to begin to advance in the future if you know, but that's based on DOT's turnpike revenue model, and unfortunately, exit 6 and 7 are delayed, into the late 2020s as a result of those COVID-related toll revenue model declines.
And removal of tolls in Merrimack.
That also is. Yeah.
So what do you think the date that would be?
I want to say that exit 7 is like 2027 to 2029, and then exit 6 is 2029 to 2032. It's something along those lines. I'd have to look it up. It's well beyond the tip period though. And part of that is these are large projects, and exit 6 alone is $100 million, and exit 7 is in the $50 to $60 million range, if I recall. So it's a substantial commitment of turnpike capital resources in order to fund those projects. So more to come. In any case, at least the PE and right-of-way phases are going to continue to move forward in this tip, and we'll see what the schedule for construction ends up being in the coming years. But that's what's programmed in the tip for exit 6 and 7 at this point. Manchester 24212 is Amoskegg's eastbound bridge on Salmon Street. This is $12.9 million, $12.94 million of funding in the tip. Construction scheduled in the tip for 2024 to 2026. It's not a new project. It's a new project in the tip because of, again, some of the adjustments that have happened around the state to move federal funds into some of the four local bridge projects. Manchester 41594. This is a project that we programmed in the tip, the 10-year plan 3 cycles ago. It is now beginning to head towards the beginning of engineering phase work. This is operational improvements at the exit 1 interchange in Manchester. This is the South Willow Road interchange, South Willow Street interchange, I should say. Total funding in the TIP, $433,000. It will be constructed in fiscal 2028, which is beyond the TIP horizon. Initial engineering phase work scheduled to begin in 2024. Manchester 42881. This is the CMAQ project at the South Willow Street Weston Road intersection. This is scheduled to move towards construction in 2025. Again, with any of the locally managed CMAQ or TAP type projects, DOT is always willing to work with communities if communities are ready to go to construction earlier than the programmed year, they will always work with towns to try to not have any projects delayed that are ready to go to construction. So it is scheduled in fiscal year 2025, but this is a locally managed project, and the construction schedule will be guided largely by the city of Manchester and their progress on the project and when they're ready to move forward with it. Same thing with Manchester 42886. This is another CMAQ project. This is the one near the Dairyfield School, the conversion of River Road and Bicentennial Drive to a roundabout. This construction schedule is currently scheduled for fiscal 27 and 28. This is of all of the CMAQ projects in the region, this one has the latest construction schedule out to the 2027-2028 period beyond the TIP. It has been that way for some time. And again, the ultimate schedule for construction, this is a locally managed project, and the schedule for construction will be driven by when the city of Manchester is ready to.
200K seems pretty low.
It's engineering phase work only
Okay, so
here.
that's
So
just-
yeah, the other. When I should have noted that it's just PE phase work in that project. The majority of the funding is
So just
construction
on.
phase funding that doesn't appear in the TIP because it's beyond 2026.
And that project's a little peculiar in the sense that Dairyfield's actually doing the match and it's actually the lead on it. Manchester's
Yeah.
just interacting with them as to how it's affecting the roadways.
Yes.
In terms of the driving force behind.
Correct.
Especially not.
It is the Dairyfield School that's been really leading that effort in conjunction with the city,
Yeah,
obviously.
no, we certainly have impact, but yeah.
Manchester 43826. This is the RAISE grant effort. We've talked in some detail about the RAISE grant effort, obviously, in previous meetings. Total funding in the 2023 to 2026 TIP period is $27.46 million. It's a $30 million project overall, encompassing $25 million of federal funding and $5 million match. The construction schedule does extend out into fiscal year 2027. So the remainder of that funding is 7 funding. We've worked closely with our colleagues at the city of Manchester to program this project in the TIP and worked closely, obviously, with New Hampshire DOT as well on that front. And so there hasn't been any change to this project. Manchester 43850. This is a new project. It was added at the end of the 10-year plan cycle based on feedback from the executive council. This is Eddy Road, exit 6 southbound on-ramp intersection safety improvements. This is not far from where we're sitting right now. It's out by Dunkin' Donuts, which is currently an only southbound on-ramp there. There will be some improvements to that, and it may allow bi-directional travel to get on that ramp. We don't know fully what the scope of work is yet. The Department of Transportation is going to look at alternatives related to this, but it is a new project. It's appearing for the first time in the TIP because it was added at the end of the last 10-year plan cycle, currently scheduled for construction in fiscal year 2026. Nashua, Merrimack, Bedford. These codes are for the Effie Everett Turnpike expansion that's happening. You have already seen some initial work happening related to the Effie Everett Turnpike expansion. This is a larger effort to widen the 2-lane sections of the Effie Everett Turnpike from exit 8 in Nashua to I-293 in Bedford. There's not a lot of this project that actually occurs within our region. The majority of it occurs in the Nashua RPC region. There are 2 projects that do affect the Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission region, both of which are in the TIP. Those are 13761 and 13761E. Those are scheduled to be completed with construction by fiscal year 2025. We do anticipate that all of the work in our region related to this project will be completed in the TIP horizon. But again, we only have a small fraction of the overall project. A lot of it is in the town of Merrimack and the city of Nashua. We do expect that work in the Nashua region may extend past the TIP horizon. Some of the work in Merrimack, I believe, is currently scheduled to extend through fiscal 27. The Salem to Manchester I-93 expansion project is obviously complete and now operational. However, the debt service continues, and we need to make sure that the debt service is programmed accordingly in our TIP and as part of our fiscal constraint. There are 4 Salem to Manchester debt service projects in the TIP. I'm not going to go through each one of them other than to highlight that project number 14633 is actually state funded debt service. So this is the 14633 project is the so-called SB 367 4 cents on the gas tax committed component of the debt service for the I-93 expansion. Where 41741 is Route 77 bridge over Canal 2 of Chote Brook. There's PE phase work happening in the TIP horizon and construction scheduled to occur beyond the TIP horizon in fiscal year 2028. There has not been any change to that from the last TIP. There are 2 child projects now for the Route 101 corridor in Wilton, Milford, Amherst, and Bedford. These are scoped as traffic and safety improvements consistent with the intent of the 2002 corridor study. There's $9.1 million in Project D and $7.39 million in Project E. Project D scheduled for construction over the coming 2 years. Project E scheduled for construction in 2026. These 2 projects are going to be born out of a prioritization study that New Hampshire DOT is finalizing. I believe VHB has been one of the parties involved in developing that prioritization study. They're looking at all the segments of the Route 101 corridor in these 4 communities and identifying based on crash history and benefit cost impacts of potential improvements where these 2 projects are ultimately going to be deployed. I actually have a meeting with DOT tomorrow to learn more about their the prioritization study and where it's going at this point. So they haven't made a final decision about where to deploy these 2 projects yet, but they are honing in on that final decision. Wyndham 40665. This is intersection improvements at Route 28 and Ralston Road. We added supplemental funding through a 10-year plan process 2 cycles ago to this project. It is scheduled to go to construction in this TIP horizon in 2026, and we have $1.77 million programmed for that. So it is moving forward as we expected. On the transit side, we have 3 MTA projects encompassing. The first encompasses their Section 5307 urbanized area funding. This is their core funding for operating paratransit, maintenance activities and planning, both encompassing the MTA and CART services. Total funding in the TIP is $22.7 million, and it's broken out both federal and local share that's required. This funding was increased to reflect an increase in 5307 urbanized area apportionments for the Manchester urbanized area. So we now the funds in the TIP do reflect the current apportionments for 5307. We work closely with MTA and our colleagues at New Hampshire DOT to specify those funding levels in this TIP update. We also have the Section 5310 direct funding from MTA. This is really when as a result of the CART merger, there's a portion of the CART service area in the Nashua urbanized area. The Nashua urbanized area gets direct 5310 funding. And so this project encompasses that direct 5310 funding. There really aren't any changes of significance. 5310 funding is used for elderly and disabled transportation services. And in particular, a lot of this funding is used for the nutrition shuttle that CART provides in the towns of Derry and Londonderry. MTA 5339, this is a capital bus and bus facilities program. Again, MTA doesn't, this is to encompass the funding that CART receives through the Nashua Urbanized Area apportionment of 5339. It's a relatively small amount of money in the overall grand scheme of things as in comparison to the other projects, and there aren't any changes of significance from the current TIP. I'm not going to go through each of these projects. There you will see that a large component of the project list is related to statewide programs. We have to encompass all of the statewide programs that may benefit the SNHPC region in the TIP. So you'll see a lot of they all have the designation program in the project list in the TIP. I've highlighted one or bolded one at the top right of the second column. It is NEVI program charging. This is the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program that's been established through the IIJA. So this is a new program that will be deploying electric vehicle charging infrastructure on the designated alternative fuel corridors around the state. So that is a new one. I would note, related to these projects, all of these different statewide programs on this slide, in some cases, we know that there are what we call child projects associated with each of those parent programs that will occur in the SNHPC region. And so we, at the suggestion of Federal Highway Administration as part of our last review, they said it would be helpful if we could include an appendix that kind of disaggregates some of those and highlights the child projects that we know are going to be happening around the region in some of those programs. So we have a new appendix in our draft TIP. It's Appendix D. It actually goes through each of those projects, and where there are specific child projects identified in our region, it specifies what those projects are and what the scope is and how much funding is currently programmed for those. All of the TAP projects, the Transportation Alternative Program projects, are programmatically listed. So the only thing that you'll see in the project list of the TIP is a statewide program for TAP or TA, Transportation Alternatives. In Appendix D, you'll see that all of the 5 current TAP projects in the state or in our region, which are the Dairy Rail Trail, the Londonderry, the kind of the northern component to the Londonderry Rail Trail to the Manchester City line, and then the southern component to the Manchester Rail Trail to the Londonderry Town line, as well as Canal Street in Manchester, and the other rail trail project in Manchester are all included. They're still there. They're just incorporated into that statewide program. And if you want details about the TAP projects, you can see those along with the other child projects in Appendix D of the TIP. The TIP also, as we've talked about many times, we have performance management and performance target setting requirements that we as an MPO must meet under federal regulations. The timing of the updates for different performance measures meshes well with the timing of the update for our TIP. So rather than having 5 different votes on different performance measures, we have incorporated the proposed performance targets in all of these different categories into the proposed TIP. Later in this meeting, you will hear from Zach and Carl about the proposed PM1, PM2, and PM3 targets, those being safety, pavement, bridge condition, and system performance targets that are in the TIP. We also have some updated transit asset management and public transit safety targets in the TIP. These are really maintenance updates of these targets, simply to make sure that we are incorporating Boston Express's coach fleet into our transit asset management targets and Boston Express's safety targets into our public transportation safety targets. So those aren't significant updates. We're just making sure we're encompassing the Boston Express services and fleet that serves the region. And you'll hear more about the safety, pavement, and bridge and system performance ones later in this.
Does that entity get like public fund?
Yes.
So it's not just like completely private.
The Boston Express I-93 service and in fact, I'll give another plug for Appendix D of the TIP. If you look at Appendix D of the TIP, There is a statewide program called the FTA 5307 program. It's the state's apportionment of section 5307 funds. We actually specify the two of the child projects for the Boston Express service in there. So there is operating support for the Boston Express services on the FE Everett Turnpike in the region, as well as I-93 in the region. Over the fiscal 23 to 26 period, I can tell you that the FE Everett Turnpike support from 5307 is $208,000, a little over that. And the I-93 support is 2.7 million over that.
So the answer to my question is yes.
Yes. And so because that is considered a commuter service that's receiving 5307 funds, we want to make sure that that our transit targets are encompassing all of the 5307 providers in the region.
That was part of the stipulation for the widening.
Correct. Linda.
Is that addition of the Boston Express information, is that new to tips?
We
You used to do it before, I just don't remember.
all we've typically done is we would have the statewide 5307 program with its funding in there. And now what we're doing differently is we're adding kind of this illustrative appendix that shows some of the child projects that live in those programs. It's just for transparency. Yeah. Any questions? That was a lot to go through, but hopefully, you know, a good overview. Again, you'll have a full month basically to digest this draft document, and feel free to send questions our way. You'll have the opportunity at your February meeting to offer any additional comments on all.
Quick question real quick. And we may want to stop sharing so you can see if there's any online. Just a quick question on the state projects where you had that enormous list of how we might benefit. One of the categories is corridor studies.
Yep.
And as you know, I was in Wyndham the other day at their economic development committee meeting, and they were very interested in finding out how far along or to what degree or when is that going to all start? And I know we have other corridor study projects for 114. Their concern is Route 111. So just wanting to put it on the table. Is there any information? I know I reached out to New Hampshire DOT, haven't heard anything back, but maybe you have some insight. Dave?
I'll make now my third plug of Appendix D, which does break down the child projects in the corridor study program. The 41859 Bedford Goffstown 114 corridor study is programmed. There is not anything that I saw in the tip window for Windham. That doesn't mean that Windham is not moving forward. It may mean that DOT programmed those funds and obligated them prior to the tip window. If it's an ongoing effort. So it may have been funding that they committed in 21 or 22 before the tip window started. I know that you've reached out to Commissioner Cass with that question, and I think I will defer to him to answer it on behalf of the department. Lee.
Yeah, hi, everybody. I just thought I'd chime in. There was a question earlier about why was the Turnpike project included in the tip because it didn't have federal funds. So another reason is that any project that is deemed regionally significant needs to be included under federal rules. It needs to be included in the tip and STIP. So those Turnpike projects, you know, are often deemed regionally significant projects. So that's another reason why you might see a project that is not necessarily federally funded still included in the tip and STIP. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for that clarification, Lee. And I would note that in section 8 of the draft tip, we actually define regionally significant project and provide that definition for everybody for additional context in the project list. So thanks for reminding me of making that plug as well. Any other questions on the tip? We have a number of other substantive agenda items to get to, so.
No question, but I'd just like to say your grasp on that material is amazing. Not a little scary, frankly.
Yeah, no way.
But anyway, next on the agenda, discussion of the CMAQ prioritization process by Nate Miller as well.
And I'm gonna share my screen here. Those of you in the room, and we do have a number of people in the room today, I made 20 copies of a handout. Are we out of those copies?
No, there's still some.
Okay, there's still some, okay. So because I just went through about 35 slides, I thought I would spare you all watching me go through another PowerPoint. So I'm just going to kind of refer to the handout in the room, which I have shared my screen. Can everybody see this document on your screen?
Yes.
This is, so basically what I'm going to walk through here is what we know at this point and what our proposed approach is related to the CMAQ program. Start by saying letters of intent were due to New Hampshire DOT on November 4th. There were 8 letters of intent received for projects in our region. Sidewalk on Old Bedford Road in the town of Bedford, a charging system for electric vehicles and to support an electric fleet in the town of Derry. 2 letters of intent from Merchants Fleet for different charging infrastructure. The first one being for workplace charging infrastructure at their headquarters, and the second being for public charging facilities, publicly accessible charging facilities in the town of Hooksett. Nuria Energy to construct a gas station with a fast food restaurant, indoor and outdoor dining area in basically near the intersection of 28 and Sims Drive in the town of Londonderry. The town of Londonderry itself, as we talked about in the 10-year plan process update for phase 7 of the Londonderry Rail Trail. The city of Manchester for congestion mitigation improvements on Mammoth Road. And then the town of Windham for the rail trail improvements on the Windham Greenway Trail. Full applications were due on January 6th. We have not received the full applications yet. We suspect that DOT is still cataloging those, still reviewing them for eligibility. I don't think they're going to pass anything along to us to evaluate that is prima facie ineligible for the program. So they're still going through that process. We expect that we will hear and receive those applications in the coming days. Some of the projects that had letters of intent, as I detailed in this table, may not have materialized into applications. Just because somebody submitted a letter of intent didn't mean that they were making a formal commitment to apply. And some of the scopes of work that you see here for some of these letters of intent may have evolved. We do know that the town of Windham did not ultimately apply. We do know that the town of Bedford, the city of Manchester, and the town of Derry all did apply. I can't speak to the private sector applications, whether those ultimately materialized or not. So at least some of the things on this list did not materialize in the applications, others did. So how many exact applications we got and the full scope of those, we don't know yet, but we will know hopefully in the coming days. Our role in the CMAQ process is twofold. We conduct the required air quality analyses for each of the applications in the region. The Federal Highway Administration has a CMAQ emissions calculator toolkit that there are different toolkits for bicycle pedestrian projects, for roundabout conversions, for other intersection improvement projects, for transit projects, for adaptive signal control projects. There are a series of federal emissions calculator toolkits that are intended to be deployed to evaluate the air quality emissions benefits of CMAQ projects. Historically, we have utilized those calculators for emissions analysis work. We expect that we will do that once again in this cycle. It'll be a cooperative effort with New Hampshire DOT, but we don't have any reason to think that we won't be using those calculators. You can go on Google and type in Federal Highway Administration CMAQ emissions calculator toolkit. You can learn more about how that process works, but that's essentially what we typically use to do the air quality analyses. We also have a role in the statewide process to prioritize CMAQ projects. There is in the statewide process, the regional priority of a CMAQ project constitutes 10% of the overall statewide score for CMAQ applications. That means we need to do a regional prioritization process to determine what our priorities are. And so I've laid out what our essentially, process is going to be. We have a hard deadline at this point of March 24th, 2023 to submit our regional priorities to New Hampshire DOT. That really gives us about 2 months by the time from when we receive the applications to when they're due. So as as these things sometimes work, we are dealing in a fairly compressed timeline. How do we propose to do that? Today, obviously, at this TAC meeting, we're giving you a general overview of the process and schedule and the like. I'll talk in a few minutes about appointing an evaluation subcommittee to work with us to develop an initial recommendation for your consideration. We'll do the same general overview at our January MPO meeting next week. We, at this point, think that it would be beneficial for the TAC to hear applicant presentations. So we would propose basically dedicating a large portion of our February TAC meeting to applicant presentations. Those may be in 10 minutes each, an overview of their proposed applications. So for those of you who represent communities that did submit, please start thinking about that, because we will be reaching out once we receive the applications to ask you to do about a 10-minute presentation or so highlighting your proposed project at our February 16th TAC meeting. Throughout the month of February, we will be busy conducting those air quality analyses for submitted projects, and then we hope to be done with that process right around the end of February, and then with that information, be ready to meet early in March, likely the week of March 6th, with an evaluation subcommittee to evaluate and develop an initial prioritization recommendation. We would then, at our March TAC meeting, present the evaluation subcommittee's recommendations to you. You can accept or reject or modify those as you see fit. And then ultimately, out of the March 16th TAC meeting, we would like to have your consensus on regional project priorities to be submitted to our MPO for their consideration. And then on March 21st, our MPO would take your recommendations and reach consensus. And they have the opportunity to modify yours recommendations as they see fit from the TAC to finalize the region's submission of priorities to DOT. And then we would submit our priorities shortly thereafter. So for evaluation criteria, we're proposing to essentially use the same evaluation criteria as the state will be using. They're laid out here. Obviously, we are not the state includes 10% for regional priority. Obviously, we're going through a process of developing regional priority, so we don't have that criterion included. But otherwise, we would propose to basically evaluate at the regional level the projects using the same criteria that the state will evaluate them by. And so our ask today is that you appoint a CMAQ evaluation subcommittee to work with our staff, comprised of disinterested TAC members. Disinterested in this case, meaning you represent TAC members that represent the town or agency that did not submit a CMAQ application. So, we can maintain our kind of jury of your peers type of approach. If we could have 3 people potentially that fit that bill that are willing to work with us to evaluate CMAQ projects, that would be excellent. So that's pretty much what we know at this point, what our proposed approach is. Again, it's kind of hard to give you a lot of details. We don't actually have the applications in hand yet, but this is how we're proposing to meet the requirement to present prioritized projects to DOT by March 24th.
So it's a certainty that the projects will be from this list minus the ones that you said weren't.
Correct.
Right.
the letter of intent was a threshold to be able to apply. So nobody that didn't submit a letter of intent can apply. So the universe of projects is going to come from that list. Or, but like I say, scopes could have evolved. There could be some tweaks, from what's on that list, but that's it won't be anything that's not on that list. And it will be shorter than that list because we know at least as a starting point that the town of Windham did not apply. Okay. Are there any TAC members that might be willing to serve on an evaluation subcommittee with us?
Well, I'm always willing, but I'd love to give up my opportunity to somebody else to have that first turn.
Linda did serve on the evaluation subcommittee for the 10-year plan process, but
I'd be happy to do that. The third guy.
thank you, Linda.
Can you scroll down to show how disinterested I might be?
Scroll, you mean back up to the,
List, yeah.
You're not
I think you're very disinterested.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this list is highly disinteresting.
all right, so do we consider that a thank
Volunteer,
you?
yeah.
Thank you, Mark. So we have Linda Kuhnhart from Francistown, Mark Sunan from New Boston. Any other volunteers?
Got to get it from people.
Anybody online? No, actually, I don't think there's anybody who online.
Megan, can you give a sense of the obligation required for this additional meeting?
Meeting. Which,
Tracy,
Yeah.
that sounds like it's right up your.
Me, so I'm just kind of.
one meeting sometime during the week of March 6th.
What better way to learn? I'd volunteer, but I'm
Sign
interested
me
in
up.
other things. So
Tracy, thank you very much. We have
I don't
three.
know,
It's good. Mark, you know.
anything to learn more. Yeah.
All right, well, we have three volunteers. So thank you all very much. I will, did I stop sharing? I think I did. So
And that meeting will happen after the February 16th. level.
that meeting will happen during the week of March 6th.
So that on the February 16th meeting where you'll hear the presentations from the different communities, that's the key one. Whether you're virtual or here, is that way you can hear from the applicants. We haven't done that in the past. And I think that's a great way for the communities or the other applicants to present their presentation. And that way we can ask questions.
We did it, the CMAQ 3 years ago.
We did.
I remember it's not very.
Oh, good. Yeah.
You ready?
At 10:01 a.m., I received an email with a link to download all of the applications. So probably literally as I was speaking. So more to come on that soon.
Thank you.
If you'd known that before, you could see there was more disinterested people.
That's right. Yeah.
Next on the agenda, the Regional Climate Action Plan Development by Suzanne Nienaber of the Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission.
Nienaber, like a knee that lives next door. So that's how that'll help you remember for the future. Let me just make sure I'm getting the Zoom share taken care of first. Or do I need, okay, here we go. I'll share this screen. All right. So we have a really dense meeting today, as you know. So I wanted to give a really short presentation about some exciting planning work we're doing around climate action in the region. So I'm going to start out by doing a few things. I want to talk about some key definitions that I think are always helpful to give a baseline for our conversations. I want to talk about our current context because we're actually building on fantastic work that's already been done in the region around the roadway vulnerability assessment. And then I want to talk about what our plan is for the next 6 months that will actually build into further climate action planning work. So to start with, oops, let me move this friend. Thank you, Zoom. I always find that it's helpful to talk about definitions because it's very easy to conflate words, right? The word mitigation is used in climate planning, And it's also used in hazard mitigation planning. So for the sake of climate, I think it's really helpful to I have actually pulled a couple of diagrams that I found helpful for myself, and take what's useful for you, leave it if it doesn't work for you. So when we talk about climate mitigation, what we're really getting at is reducing greenhouse gases. We want to do what we can to slow the pace of climate change where we can. When we talk about climate resilience, we're really drawing upon our multifaceted community networks and thinking about how are we going to respond in the case of crisis, and how can we survive and thrive even as we're facing shifts in our climate and conditions in our region. What we'll be really focused on, particularly for the next 6 months, is this discussion of climate adaptation. And that's really looking at what are some immediate actions we can take to be more prepared. How do we take the latest data on climate modeling and make sure we are really aware of what's coming and making some changes on the ground now? I'm going to show you one more image that I found really helpful. The first one came from American Planning Association. This one comes from the Union of Concerned Scientists. And I really like this framing too, where they really say that like every community is always going to have a resilience gap. We can't predict the future. We don't know what's to come. There's always going to be some challenge that's going to be hard for us to address. But what we can do is start to shrink that resilience gap. And there's two main ways to do that. One is our adaptation efforts that we're taking right now on the ground, changes to the way we're designing and building and kind of running systems in our community. And number two is mitigation. And again, that's reducing your greenhouse gas emissions to slow the pace of climate change. The very unique and specific climate concerns that our region is facing really comes down to precipitation. We're going to be seeing a lot more very heavy or frequent, significant rainfall events. Basically what we're going to be seeing, it's interesting, we're going to have a really stark kind of increase of precipitation happening in a kind of bigger and more momentous instances. More dry days, but when it does rain, it's going to be a problem. We'll have a higher risk of flooding and increased infrastructure vulnerability. And we'll see more situations like this photograph you see here. This is courtesy of DES, and it was taken in Barrington, New Hampshire in July 2021 following a storm. So the culvert failed, the roadway washed out, and we'll see more and more instances like this unless we start to really tackle some adaptation strategies. What we'll do is build on the fantastic work that the Commission has already done on the 2020 Regional Vulnerability Assessment. And for those of you who have been with us with TAC for a while, this was James Bayo's baby. It's a really fantastic piece of work. It's incredibly rigorous. It does a region-wide assessment of culverts and small bridges that might be vulnerable throughout the region. It provides kind of a framework to assess and evaluate the risks of extreme precipitation events for each of these vulnerable stream crossings. Zach has put together a fantastic interactive online GIS map, so it gives a way to kind of navigate around the region. And I think this is a very important, really important tool for our regional climate action work. So what I'd like to do is build upon this very successful piece of work over the next 6 months. So 3 things that we're going to be doing. Number one, we're going to be expanding our technical analysis. We've been talking with Zach, Carl, and we really want to make sure that that beautiful GIS map that's been created captures all of the federal aid eligible roadways. The other thing we want to do is consider other aspects of vulnerability. So we've already looked at culverts and stream crossings. But we also want to be mapping areas where there's steep slopes, areas where there's fluvial erosion, which is where the riverbed is actually shifting over time. So we'll be incorporating a kind of a broader spectrum of vulnerability. And then we want to kind of start to establish criteria and metrics to assess vulnerability, not at the site level, but also at the corridor level. So looking at the big picture, what are our kind of critical regional corridors that have multiple points of vulnerability, and start to kind of zoom out our lens in terms of adaptation and challenges. The other big goal for our next 6 months is to provide some practical implementation guidance. So we have a lot of really fantastic information from the vulnerability assessment. And what we want to do is start to translate that into some concrete action steps that we can be taking on the ground. Right now, we're doing a resource scan and identifying some best practices of various strategies we can use to address vulnerable sites and corridors. And this is everything from updating design and engineering to account for the latest climate modeling. It's also looking at operations and maintenance, right? Do we need to actually be spending more time and money and staff on sediment removal in culverts? We're also looking at things like public education, as well as cooperation. What are the different various partners that need to be involved? We want to actually select and handpick a number of case studies that represent a good cross-section of corridors throughout the region and illustrate, how do you take this menu of strategies and put them to work? And then we're going to do a little bit of high-level modeling of economic modeling. What would happen if we just left it as is and ran the risk of it washing out, or we have to replace it, versus the cost of taking some adaptation measures now.
Suzanne, on the last point that you just brought up, so are you going to look at like the, for lack of a better word, the importance of a roadway, or how it serves the regional network, what a detour may be, what the volume of it is? In other words, in order to try and prioritize, you may have a culvert that's very likely to wash out, but if it's only serving 20 people and it's an easy
Right.
detour versus a roadway that's taking 10,000 cars and there is no detour.
Exactly. I mean, I will say that because we're trying to do a lot in just a
Mhm.
short period of time, we won't be doing a rigorous prioritization in the way that the vulnerability assessment did.
Yeah.
But what we will do is take those factors into account. And in terms of, we will probably not be handpicking any case studies that where a culvert washout would only affect 20 people. We're going to be looking at a diversity of the types of vulnerabilities in terms of like culverts, steep slopes, floodplain. We're also going to be looking at, we want to make sure we're capturing examples from rural, suburban, as well as urban environments. We want to look at roadways that are being operated and maintained by state as well as municipalities. So we'll be handpicking a cross section. What we won't be doing is that super rigorous, like, here's your top one highest scoring level of vulnerability. But I'm hopeful that like through this exercise, we're actually going to get to a better place where should we choose to do that level of prioritization, it will become much easier once we have this framework in hand.
Thank you.
And then third thing, which I'm very excited about, and this is what this is a great group of people to talk to about how we can advance regional climate collaboration. And the thing that we have to look forward to, this is a preview, we're going to be hosting a inaugural climate action workshop in April. We're still solidifying the dates, but Town of Derry has offered their municipal center. We're very grateful for that. And we are already starting to recruit some fantastic speakers. So we'll have a panel of kind of multidisciplinary speakers. We'll have some interactive opportunities for folks to weigh in on the draft material in in development. And then we'll also be able to have some conversations. We're focused right now on roadway adaptation, but what are some other priority transportation areas we need to be talking about? What are some other sectors that we should be collaborating with in order to really put these ideas to work more effectively? Because we really see this growing into a much bigger piece of work that will last for a few years. And so today, I'm really coming to you because I'm seeking some climate champions to help me guide this process. I think just to give you some context of what we're expecting, you don't have to be a climate scientist. You don't have to be kind of focused on this day in and day out, but we do want someone who has a passion for this type of work and who might be interested in informing not only the arc of our next 6 months, but what we'll be hoping to do as a region moving forward. So I kind of scoped out expectations. Really, I'd want our kind of climate champion advisors to be participating in 3 main things. First is the meeting probably next month or early March, where we'll review some of the early content and I'll get some advice on the workshop preparations that are already underway. We'll have a second meeting when really I would ask all of our climate champions to attend the regional workshop so they can kind of be part of it and hear what the community is saying and what our stakeholders are saying. And meeting 3 would be basically helping to review an updated climate adaptation action plan for roadways. So you might have ideas in mind right now. Maybe there's someone in this room who would be interested in getting involved. And I also have my contact information up and we'll send that around after the meeting if there's somebody you know of who you think could be a really great person to contribute to this work. Any questions? Any hands going up? We'll talk. You got it.
Jillian, I could see you, I'm leaning forward there.
Oh. You'll volunteer? Good. Fantastic. Yeah, it'll be fun. I'm really looking forward to pursuing this work. It's already been really great working with folks in-house, and we want to bring more people into the fold. Anyone else? Last call, or we'll,
So is there anything on your website that would have information on this, so that if I could find somebody that might be interested, they could learn more?
yes. Well, the vulnerability assessment is posted.
Okay.
So that's a link we can easily share.
Just to email Suzanne, you'll be all set.
Okay. Perfect.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Excellent.
I'll bring some business cards in and drop them around too, just in case anybody wants to.
Want to stop sharing and then see if
Yep.
anyone.
Oh, yeah, of
applies.
course. Oh, thank you for. Anybody online interested in volunteering or have any questions? All right,
Thank you.
well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is the overview of the proposed safety performance, pavement, bridge condition performance, and system plate performance targets by Carl Eppich of the Southern Hampshire Planning Commission.
Yes, hi everyone, I'm Carl Eppich, and Zach Zwick is really the one that's gonna be doing most of the presenting here. I'm more meant to introduce the topic. Yeah, wait till Zach gets this up, but this is, as Nate alluded to earlier, or mentioned during the presentation on the tip, we're required to review and adopt these measures, these targets, some annually, which is PM1, and 2 and 3, which we're going to talk about is every 4 or 5 years? 4 years. 4 years. So happens to be that we're doing both. We usually do PM1 around this time each year, and we'll be doing 2 and 3 as well. I guess we can go right to slides. So this is about transportation performance management. This is something we've done for nearly a decade, required by the feds. FAST Act requires it in these categories: safety, pavement, bridge, system performance, congestion, freight movement, and congestion mitigation and air quality. And the first one is underlined here is the safety, but we'll be covering the next two as well. These are the 5 federally required safety measures, and they're up here in crystal clear. We're going to go into a lot of detail on these, so I'm not going to go through each of the definitions right now, but it's mostly about reducing fatalities and serious injuries, which are defined differently, of course, and then ultimately looking at non-motorized injuries and fatality. Next slide. So we do this through federal legislation and state level safety performance targets. Each of the MPOs in the states goes through this, adopts them. State also adopts these measures and targets. And we basically, as an MPO, either have to accept the state targets or develop our own. MPOs are allowed to set their own. And we're going to do that with one in this category, which we'll get to later. We did this last year. For 2023, we're going to be recommending supporting all of the state targets with the exception of one, a regional target for the fatality rate. And here's where Zach goes deep into the data.
Okay. Well, in the interest of time, we're not going to go as deeply today as I would like, but that's better for you all. The first number is the number of fatalities, a 5-year moving average. As you can see here, this is our region. We've been pretty consistent over the last 5 years, between 20 and 15. I will say that last year was the deadliest year for our region since at least 2007. That's as far back as my records go. We had, I want to say, 27 fatalities last year. This next slide is showing, the red line, the red dots are the, the target that we, sorry, not the target, the fatality rate that we actually, that actually occurred for our region, the 5-year average. The X's are the targets that were either adopted by us or the state, and the orange is the projected state target. So you can see that we were about online for 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022. Well, we don't know about 2022, but we're projected to be online for 2022. And the state raised it a little bit, but we're still pretty much in line with that.
You're saying 2022 is considerably higher, didn't you say it was like 27?
Well, we'll see. Well, they knew, so they knew it, yeah. So that might be why it went up a little bit for the state. So they knew. I'm sorry, not 2021. We don't have 2022 yet. So the reason it went up there a little bit, even the state's a little bit higher than our line, is probably because the state overall also saw higher rate. The second measure here is the fatality rate. The blue line is the state rate, and the red line is the regional rate. This is, fatalities per 100 million vehicle miles traveled. And you can see there that, the state is about 0.9 and we're about 0.7. And it's consistently been like that since at least, 5 years, 2012, and then that's a 5-year average. So since about 2007, we've been significantly below the state. And that's why last year we adopted a different target than the state. So again, the red is where we were, the X different targets. And then you can see for target 2022, we adopted 0.75 as opposed to the state. I can't remember what the state adopted, but it was higher in line. Yeah. And see for 2023, it's at about 0.874, and we're again suggesting 0.75, which is just keeping it lower than the state. And that reflects the fact that we have more traffic, or we have more vehicle miles traveled, less rural roads, which means we just in general have a lower fatality rate than the state.
I would just note that we do have a little discussion of this in the draft tip about the dynamic of urban versus rural areas as it relates to fatality rate. Urban areas nationwide have a substantially lower fatality rate than rural areas. That dynamic obviously plays out here in New Hampshire, where we are the most urban area of the state, and we have a fatality rate that's substantially lower than the state as a whole, which encompasses a lot of rural areas. We link in the tip to a NHTSA document that discusses this on a nationwide basis and some of the behavioral factors that underlie that. And behavioral factors in terms of alcohol use contributing to rural crashes, seatbelt use contributing to rural fatalities. And there are just some behavioral differences between urban drivers and rural drivers that are laid out in that report as well that contribute to this dynamic.
Could you also think about probably lower speeds possibly and or better road conditions? I'm sure.
Yeah, the land use of this area, or urban areas contributing to lower speeds. And yeah.
If I'm gonna crash on 93, somebody's gonna be there pretty quick. If I go off the road, near my parents off a cliff, somebody might not find me until the morning. Yeah, so it's just, response time plays a big deal.
The same hold true for injuries though.
No,
We'll think it'll be flip-flop.
It'd be higher.
they're about the same.
Oh, wow.
Roughly the same. For serious injuries, I should say. Serious injury. I would imagine injuries and crashes in general are much higher in the urban. So speaking of serious injuries, this is our 5-year moving rate. We see that we've been declining over the past, 10 years. Part of that, we still think is some of that. There was some improvements around reporting where police departments got better about reporting what is a serious injury, what is not actually a serious injury. But we're getting to the point now that we're starting to think that, some of that misreporting is, aging out of the trend. So this number is starting to get more reliable. Again, here's the 5-year average where we were in the different targets. You can see the targets have been held relatively relatively stable. It's about 100 for us. And, so the target this year with the state target would be 94.6 is what we'd support. You can see that we're edging down below that. But as I said, some of that is reflecting the fact that we may have had artificially high numbers before. So I'd be a little cautious about, picking a lower number just yet, because we're not sure how much that decline is actually real.
So just in general, and sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. Can you define serious injury?
No, it's a life altering.
Life altering.
There was a literal list that you can go through and you're like, okay, don't want that. It's not, I was in a crash and I got, I hurt my head. There was a crash in front of me this summer where a guy blew through a red light, hit the car, sent them spinning. And that person obviously had it was a very big deal for them, but that would not have been a serious injury because they got out and they walked away.
You're talking here about paralysis, compound fractures, loss of amputations, permanent brain injuries.
It's major.
So probably outside of your realm, but it it irks me whenever I see these targets where you have like injuries and fatalities and they're in decimals. Just saying, just in general, that I'm not sure how you get 0.6 people injured.
It was a 5-year average, so that's where you can. All these are 5-year averages. So individual, any
Target for
individual-
2023 for a 5-year average.
Yes.
So you're taking into account the 4 years prior plus whatever. Okay. All right.
If you look at individual years, they are whole people.
So long, okay, so now we're at our sort of 0.2s.
Here is serious injury rate. Again, serious injuries per vehicle mile traveled. The red is us and this blue is the state as a whole. And you can see that we are, they change a little bit, but they're pretty close and they're pretty in lock in terms of the decline. Again, we're not sure how much of that decline is real. And so it looks very similar to the overall rate, the overall number of fatalities, serious injuries. And so at this time, we're advising adopting the state rate, although in the future, we might reevaluate that if this trend continues to decline like that. The final one is the 5-year number for non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. You can see that there was a big bump there in about it looks like it's in 2017, but I believe it was actually in 2014. We just had a particularly bad year where there was just a large number of pedestrian fatalities and serious injuries. And these are relatively small numbers, so you can have something like that. But we are sliding, or we seem to move past that bump, and now we're down to about 12 per year for the rate for the area. And again, we're seeing the same thing, where we have that kind of decline, and we're down. You can see that the state went up there from they were 9.7 the year before last year, and now this year they're 10.8. That's because they saw a general increase in non-motorized fatalities and pedestrian injuries. And so they're just compensating for that expectation to go back up. We probably would expect that as well. I can't remember. I believe we had more last year. So we're just, adopting the state rates out of caution because we're not really sure what's going to happen yet, because rates are going up around the country. I believe we're back to Carl just to go over real quick our recommendations.
I'm not gonna keep bugging you guys, but
Yeah.
so when we say motorized, are we assuming roadway or does recreational like snowmobiles or HRVs, do those?
So they have to be on the public roads. So like,
Public road.
so like there, and the only reason I know this is because there's been some in our fatality data. In the last 10 years, there was a golf cart and 2 ATVs. They were both one was illegally driving on the road and the other was crossing the road and got hit. But if you're driving your snowmobile on some path somewhere,
So you're off-road,
if you're off road, you're not.
just curious, so talk about motorized.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, so these tables just kind of summarize what you just reviewed, all the numbers and the 5-year rolling averages. The green area in the center is just the trends, reset what's happened and what the desired direction is. Obviously, we want to reduce the rates, reduce the nominal numbers of deaths, injuries, non-motorized or motorized. And then the target number, again, this is down to the decimal place on the right because these are averages. Next slide. Another way of looking at it, the different years, the 5-year rolling averages actual for the 16 to 20 period, 17 to 21 period. The trends, and as you can see, they changed a little bit, at least for the brown and the green in the recent column, and then desired again. We always want things to go down, at least in these categories, so that is consistent throughout. All the way to the right, we have the state target number and then the SNHPC recommended target. We're not going to be, this is just for your information today, as we've covered a few times, and in all categories to support the state target with the exception of the second one, which is the fatality rate per 100 million BMT. And again, because our region has the additional miles and ultimately a lower actual rate, we are looking at adopting that 0.75 again like we did last time.
So these are the targets that are detailed in the draft tip. So these are the safety targets that are proposed in there. And then ultimately, if there are no changes to those targets through the course of this discussion and the discussion with our MPO, then when the tip is adopted, these targets will be adopted along with them. With the ship.
I'm sure I'm not asking this question the right way, but is there a document where certain segments or just a roadway corridor where like it documents so you would see the like I-93 between X and Y, there were 2 fatalities.
Yeah, well, so the FARS data is public. And so you find it through that, and they do at least break it down at a high level, whether by functional class. So you could look at a particular municipality and you could say, okay, interstate in Manchester, it's this number. I can't remember if you dig into the FARS data all the way down, you can see individual fatalities by their exact location, but it takes a lot of work.
Because it would make sense that you would want to use that in bigger decision making.
Yeah, we do work with communities on the implementation of the highway safety improvement program in the region, and part of that involves looking at crash histories where fatal and severe injury crashes have occurred, and doing road safety audits and implementing highway safety improvement program projects from that.
Even to the extent of looking at the way the accidents occur. Is it a T-bone accident? Is it a rear end accident? What's the cause of what's causing the accident?
In the FARS data, it's tables on tables on tables of all the details. So I've delved into it a little bit this winter and I was able to pull out some really interesting stuff versus people, fatalities versus wearing a seatbelt versus not, and all this sort of thing. But if you want to get down to the very particular things, it's there. It's complicated. Thank you. I think we're moving on to the next one.
So PM2 is pavement and bridge performance measures. This is, again, talking about mostly it's all federal infrastructure that these measures are. Good. Next one. Again, this is a requirement of the FAST Act, pavement and bridge category. Next slide. Okay, so within this category, we have a little bit different way to slice it. We're looking at interstates and non-interstates, and then bridges. And what the feds are interested in are percentage of interstate lane miles in good condition, percentage of interstate lane miles in poor condition. So the first two. Then non-interstate national highway system, percentage of non-interstate NHS in good condition, and percentage of non-interstate in poor condition. And then NHS bridges, again, in good condition versus poor condition. And there's a way that they do that, percentage of the deck area in good condition. And I don't know the details of how they make the determination of deck in good condition versus poor condition.
And just one clarification, this is the federal definition of bridge, which is 20 feet or more, so not the state.
Yeah. And this is similarly to PM1, the MPOs are allowed the flexibility to set our own targets, and the state sets them, and then we look at them and say yes or no. And in this case, we're going to be recommending that we accept state targets for all of these measures. And here's where Zach goes into the state of our bridges and pavement.
So these are the pavement and bridge targets from the state, and they have it for a number of different, they have a base year, they have a 2-year, a 4-year, and a state of good repair. We're only really interested in the 4-year because that's the only one we get to vote on ultimately, but it's not a bad idea to see the whole. So you can see that, the interstate, their 4-year goal is 57% in good, non-interstate 35%. And I'll go through the definitions of what good, fair, and poor is for both bridge and pavement. Important to note that we're only talking about the national highway system. So we're only talking about stuff either here in blue and yellow. So the pavement might be terrible outside of your front door, but the federal government probably doesn't care about that. It's only the national highway system, which are roads that have been deemed, essential to either economy or defense. So they're either interstate, primary arterials, the roads that are key to defense military establishments, and then connectors between those, and also to multimodal hubs like the airport. So you can see there's some stuff going out there by the airport. So the definition of pavement from the federal government for, it depends on whether it's good, fair, or poor, depends on 3 different categories. Roughness, cracking, and rutting. And if cracking would be the roughness, I think we can all understand. Cracking is the measure of the percent of the wheel area that has fatigue cracks. And rutting is the whole, basically the dips or the depth of ruts in the road. And so if 3 or more of those scores are good, then the pavement is in good condition. If 2 or more are poor, the pavement is in poor condition. Anything else, it's fair. So you can see that the majority of roads are going to end up in the fair designation. And DOT in general is going to try to prioritize keeping things in fair condition versus prioritizing good. And because if they were here, they would tell you that keeping things are in good is very expensive and doesn't add that much benefit. While fair, is not, you wouldn't really notice that much of a difference and is much more cost effective. And they would make the same argument for bridges as well. So here's just showing real quick, this is interstate payment in good condition. Blue is us, red is DOT. I'd want you to keep in mind that the scales here vary a lot. So in this case, we have 0 to 100. And on here, we have 5 to 0, 5%. And that's just to show you that there actually is some difference here, but it's tiny. So the difference between us and this and the in DOT and percent of pavement in poor condition is we're talking about less than 1%. So these are very small numbers. If we're talking about pavement in good condition, you can see that our rate is a little bit higher than DOT, and it actually jumps up here in about 2021. And you might guess that the reason for that would be is that's about the completion of the I-93 expansion between Salem and Manchester. So we had a bunch of new pavement put down during that period. So our pavement's looking better than the state as a whole. The state's also looking pretty good, but you would not expect that to maintain on the way out.
Well, just that nuance is that we went from 2 lanes.
Yeah, well, actually, the 2 lanes are still only reflected here,
Oh, okay.
but it's new pavement. So it would actually, so next time we do this,
It's gonna jump.
it could potentially be even more significant. But the state of good repair, the long term out there, the 6-year plus, they're expecting it to be lower than that, just because they can't keep that high level.
Yeah, because the only municipal roads that are in the NHS are probably what, Manchester and Goffstown.
Londonderry has some because they're urban or compact areas around the airport, so they probably have a couple, I think. But yeah, there aren't many. And then we have the non-interstate national highway system, and here we have non-interstate in good condition. Again, we're kind of pretty close to the state overall. In general, it's lower. We're only about 40% for this. So this is going to be 101, 114, some of these, and also some other ones you wouldn't think of, like Hanover Street in Manchester is, just because. Similar with poor conditions that, it's pretty low. We're talking about, 4% at its highest here, and we're pretty close to the state, but we're expecting about, 5% going out. For bridges, the bridges is scored on a scale from 9 to 0, 9 being excellent condition, pristine, 0 being don't drive over that bridge. And most of it is in the, you can see anything 4 or lower is poor, and good is 9, 7 or higher, and then you have that 6, which is 5, or that fair, which is 6 or 5. And this is determined by the percentage of the total deck area that's in NHS bridges, which is in good condition or poor condition. So you can see that, like here for both us and the DOT, about 60% of our total area was in good condition in 2017. And here we've jumped up a lot again, because this is only looking at, this is going to be driven a lot by interstates, and we just built a lot of new bridges over 93. So our rate is way up there. Again, we're kind of following the state here as well, but it jumps around a fair amount. So ultimately our recommendations would be to adopt the state record or the state targets, which is the 4-year, which are the numbers there that I've highlighted. It's for some of them that's going to be an increase in terms of the level of poor, or it'll be a decrease in good and an increase in poor, but that's really reflecting the fact that we had a bunch of new infrastructure built in the last couple of years, and we can't expect that to be continued.
So again, in our draft tip, we present these targets as the proposed targets for the region and do we want to, given that it's 11 o'clock, do we want to cover PM3 next month, maybe, or do people have a hard out at 11 o'clock? Yeah, it might make sense to cover PM3 next month, given the time constraints. We had quite an ambitious agenda.
Yes.
You can read about the PM3 performance targets in the draft tip. That'll be my final plug for the reading the draft tip of the day. So
We're not taking any vote or something right now.
Just no information.
these targets are all in the draft tip. So when we take recommendation of the draft tip next month, we are also therein taking recommendation of the targets proposed therein.
Okay, great. Before everybody leaves and heads out, two things to announce, completely different. Just wanted to recognize Fred Roberge and all his service with Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission. Fred's retiring and therefore the things from today, but yeah, I just wanted to recognize Fred. Thank you so much, Fred, for all you've done for the commission and the state. And Fred will be here, I think, one more time for the RCC meeting coming up, I think on his last day. So we're gonna squeeze out the most we can from Fred. But certainly, I don't know if you want to say anything, Fred.
Just that the planning commission should be commended for its role in transportation development. Not only in this community, but on a statewide level, both Nate and Sylvia have played prominent roles in developing programs. You know, we're looking at a very large growth in senior population, including myself. And that will necessarily demand some changes in delivery systems that are currently there. And I know that the planning commission will be at the forefront of that. And I think it's something that should be modeled nationally, more closely working relationships between planning commissions and service agents. So I'm proud of the role that I played in this community and at the state level, and hopefully I'll keep my fingers in it a little bit as a consultant as I move forward into the next phase of my life and spend a little bit of quality time with my grandchildren and do some traveling with my wife, and I just look forward to it. So thank you all for the opportunity and the working relationship.
One more announcement, Carl Eppich on our team has decided there's greener pastures in Maine. Foolish as that logic is, no kidding. He obviously has been on our team for 4 years and been a good team player, and we will miss him. And he's wrapping up a EV corridor project and also ITS, and he's handed off a bunch of different programs. So we will be hopefully trying to find someone to come in and help out with more transportation work, but also recognize Carl.
Carl, I'd just say it's been a pleasure working with you for the last 4 years. It's been nice. We've known each other for a long time, NECAPA and stuff, and it's been great to be your colleague and wish you all the best in your next adventure in Maine.
Yeah, thank you. For those of you who don't know, I live in Maine, and I've been here 4 years. Nate and I have known each other for about 12, 15 years. He got me into a fantasy football league, planners across northern New England. But I had an opportunity back in Maine. It's the director of municipal assistance program. I'm still having trouble pronouncing my own job, but it's within the Bureau of Information Resources and Land Use Planning, and it's a big job statewide with bringing in some of the topics we talked about today: climate adaptation and action planning, and what's the other big topic of today? Housing. And modernizing that within the comprehensive planning system. So I'll be working with 9 different RPCs and COGs throughout Maine, as well as the large cities and service centers, as we call them, to implement all of that. It has been a real pleasure working here with those of you that I've been able to work with directly or, here at these meetings. And yeah, it's definitely bittersweet, as when I told Nate and Sylvia and the staff, but it's one of those opportunities you just have to take. And so here I go. Wish me luck. It's a fully remote position, although I have an office in Augusta. My boss lives down east, near Eastport. She's 2 hours from Augusta. I'm only 40 minutes from Augusta. So it's I will be working with people locally, meaning, I can't just work at home all the time. That's part of the reason I took this job. So I working with a bunch of planners who all work remote, and we're looking at either getting office space or actually within where I used to work, the Greater Portland Council of Governments. They have a lot of vacant offices there because they're almost fully remote. And so we may propose that we rent some space there, a couple of us who are fully remote.
But I'll see you around Portland.
Yes. And I have family here, so you come over here quite a bit. Thank you all.
Thank you both for your service.
That's been.
Any other business?
I would just note as a follow-up, we've received 11 applications from the region. So
Wow.
some of those for the CMAQ program, some of those private sector ones ended up kind of being split into multiple applications. So we've got an application from Revision Energy in the town of Bedford, the town of Bedford's own application, the town of Derry's application, the 2 applications from Merchants Auto Group in Hooksett, the town of Londonderry's application, a Nuria Energy retail application in Londonderry, a New Hampshire DOT Bureau of Traffic statewide application that impacts Seabrook, Londonderry, and Windham. So that's a statewide application that seems to have been scoped a little more closely in our region. A Revision Energy application in Manchester, the city of Manchester's own application, as well as a Nuria Energy retail application in the town of Windham, which some of these private sector applications are the installation of charging infrastructure at grocery stores. Some of them are the installation of charging infrastructure at convenience stores. So, a number of these are private sector applications. So more to come on that, but looks like we're going to have our hands full with the members of the evaluation committee. So thank you all very much. You're not allowed to pull out now. Yep. That's right. Yeah. No, already on the record on that.
Is there any vote or anything that's required for that formation of that subcommittee or anything?
It's
like
just
that?
an ad hoc. I mean,
Okay. I just didn't know.
Yeah, ultimately, they're not,
They're
they're just
a
making a
recommendation.
recommendation to all of you. So.
I would recommend considering 11 applications that we keep the presentation to 5 minutes apiece with
Yeah.
1 minute reserved for questions, if there are any.
Yeah, or
We'll never get through that if we give 10 minutes apiece, so I'm.
right. Well, some of these are the
Seven.
same applicant applying for 3 different, very similar projects. So I think maybe we give Nuria Energy 10 minutes to cover their universe of projects and give Revision 10 minutes to cover their universe of projects.
And as
So.
we have seen from our fearless leader, you can get a lot across 5 minutes if you're well thought out.
Yes, I agree.
So we'll have to dive in and figure out how to structure that, but I think you can definitely count on the majority of the February meeting being applicant presentations. To the extent that we can ask some of these private sector applicants with multiple with multiple different applications to summarize theirs. And all of their universe of applications in 10 minutes, we will do that.
Any other business? Motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn?
Yeah.
Second,
Second.
all in favor? Right, thank you.
Who was the third? So Francistown, New Boston, who was the third person? For the
MTA.
MTA?
Manchester Transit.
Oh.